So not long after Lula was born, we noticed that there was some kind of concerns with her right hand leg, and about when she was 6 weeks old she was diagnosed with a condition called Hemi Hypertrophy. So Hemi Hypertrophy is an overgrowth condition. Basically the growth cells in certain body parts or parts of the body, they just don't know when to switch off, and they continue growing more than other parts of the body.
Here.
So with that diagnosis comes an increased risk of her developing childhood cancer of the liver and or kidneys. So that was very scary to navigate, and I definitely feel like that has been the driving force for me with Lula, with continuing breastfeeding, because I was sort of like, well, everything else is out of my control of what could happen to her health, but breastfeeding is the one thing that I can control to ensure that I'm pumping her full of goodness, you know, and so for me, especially, you know, when I had to return to work when she was 5 months old, that was a really overwhelming time, because I had never returned to work with such a young baby before, and I had never had to express and pump and sterilise and store breast milk. I had never had to navigate that before. So learning to do that all whilst also having in the back of my mind her health conditions, and that was full of a lot of anxiety and a lot of learning. It was like a real change in gears from what I had to work through in the past. But again, I just reached out to as many kind of sources that I could possibly, and I had a lot of discussions. I did a lot of Googling, I spent a lot of time on Kelly Mum, and I kind of figured it out slowly but surely, and we just found a groove that worked. Shortly before my return to work, because of the amount of stress and anxiety that I was feeling leading up to that, I noticed a huge drop in my supply, which was not something that I had experienced previously, unless it was with the first time with my right hand side dropping. So that was really scary, because in my mind I was like, I breastfed twins for 2 years, there's going to be no supply issues here, you know, like that's not a concern. I didn't even give that a second thought during my pregnancy. So when that started to happen, I really panicked, and I reached out, I went to the doctor, and I got a script for domperidone, which is also something I had never had to take before. And I didn't like having to take medication. I didn't feel it didn't really align with, you know, my normal kind of practices, I guess. But I did notice an immediate rise in my supply,
for me.
and it did really help me at that time when I needed it most. So right before I started work, I think literally a couple of days before I was due to start, I woke up one morning and I was like, oh my gosh, I felt like I had, you know, my milk had really come back. I was able to actually express something into a bottle, and it felt like it was going to be really good. And then I found out that I have high Lipase. Yeah. So basically what that did was it affected something in the composition of my milk, and it gave it like a really soapy, sour, almost like off milk but not quite, taste to my milk when I had frozen it, and then went to defrost it for Lula to take to preschool. So that also sent me into panic, because I was like, oh my gosh, well, not only am I struggling to pump this milk, I'm also now I have a whole stash in the freezer which is basically unusable. So learning to navigate this new high lipase issue, which was something that I'd never even heard of, and I had very limited time, I quite quickly realised that even if I did the technique where you boil it at a certain temperature for about 17 seconds or something, I quickly realised that also just didn't work for us, unfortunately. We still had the funny tasting milk after it had been frozen, so I was left with then I had to experiment with how long I could leave my milk in the fridge, freshly pumped milk, before it started to turn that sour soapy taste. And so then I found out that I had about 36 hours before my milk became undrinkable. So when Lula started at about 5.5, 6 months old, I would need to pump 3 bottles of about 150 mils for her for the day that she was going to be at preschool. And so that to me, I was like, okay, I've got 36 hours to pump these bottles ahead of time. So once I kind of got my head around how I was going to best, express and store my milk, and that I felt like I was able to pump enough for her needs by taking domperidone as just an additional support to other supplements and things that I was doing to increase that, I finally felt a little bit of relief with my anxiety before going back to work. And I remember that before I started, I also had like a meeting with my employer and stuff and just let her know that breastfeeding was obviously a huge priority, and that there were, these were kind of, I provided that, the current regulations and guidelines for breastfeeding in the workplace, so that everyone was sort of on the same page with my rights to breastfeed and to have a safe and clean area within the workplace. And they were really good about it. They were really on board with it. They understood how important that was for me returning to work. There was an adjustment period where Lula spent the first month at home with my mother-in-law before being sent to her local preschool with her sisters. So there was a month where, while we were both kind of learning, being apart from each other, my mother-in-law would be able to drive her to my workplace if she needed just a midday feed or, some comfort, just to know that I was still present throughout the day, even though I was, not being able to see her for a few hours at a time. So that made for a really smooth transition, and I'm really grateful that we had that month to kind of figure things out between us before she started at preschool. And then when she moved, her preschool were incredible, with, just ensuring that the breast milk that I worked so hard to express and store and everything, that they, heated it correctly, and that it was treated with a lot of respect, which was really, really nice, as I hadn't seen that in centres when Lucas was younger, when he, when we were I did that briefly, and it was sort of just chucked in the microwave, and there was no kind of conversation about the importance of that milk. So actually going to a centre where that was a real priority for them was ensuring that my milk was stored correctly, heated correctly. They had really calming rituals when it came to feeding baby, and that was also a really beautiful transition. She's now 15 months and she's still successfully breastfeeding. So it has been quite an eventful last sort of 10 months, and we have had to do a lot of new learning, as a family and, myself. But overall, I think that all of my different feeding experiences have had a very powerful impact on the way that I can support other women, especially women in my family that are, going on to have babies or, had babies. I feel like breastfeeding has taken me through such an incredible journey of ups and downs, but it has really shaped me, and it has taught me so many values about myself, and it has taught me just so many new skills, and has brought a new approach to the way that I live day to day.